In the 2 years or so since I posted it on my website, my survey on the pronunciation of words like train and drum and street has had, amazingly, well over 10,000 responses from English speakers around the world. In fact, the unexpected size and complexity of the dataset is one of the reasons it's taken me so long to get to grips with it. But I felt I couldn't go any longer without feeding back some results to you, and so I've spent the holiday season wading through spreadsheets and pestering my poor colleague Kevin Tang of Heinrich Heine University with statistical questions. I think by necessity the statistical detail will have to wait to the proper written up version next year, but here I want to share general patterns which have turned out to be far more dramatic than I expected. I titled my original video, "Why Do People Say SHTRONG?", which was the most asked pronunciation question on Google at the time. That sh really stands out, especially to those of us who pronounce words like strong with a regular S. But what underlies that sh is something much less noticed but much more pervasive, namely a change in the following sound. A change that's been essentially ignored by mainstream dictionaries and by textbooks on English phonetics. But as I said in my video, millions of speakers on both sides of the Atlantic have taken words like try and dry, trip and drip, train and drain, and replaced the t and d with ch and j. I'm going to call this train changing and drum majoring. If you watch that video, you will see the explanation is all about assimilation, that is, neighbouring sounds becoming more like each other. Older speakers like me pronounce words like train and drum with initial T and D, but we retract the T and D, pulling the tongue back towards the position of the following R, specifically from the normal alveolar position of T and D towards the post-alveolar position of English R. Americans, by the way, say alveolar. This retraction makes my T in train sound considerably more like ch, and my D in drum sound more like j. Train, drum, and it's no surprise that eventually infants of younger generations decided while acquiring their English that these sounds actually were ch and j. This is why kids learning to read and write started to come up with spellings like this one.
My 7-year-old son writes, "Watch out for the stormtrooper."
This has been going on for some time. When I interviewed accent coach Adrian from Accent Amazing for my video on out-of-date dictionaries, he mentioned how confused he'd been to learn that the official spelling of his own name contains a D.
When I was a kid, I always wondered why it was like my name, Adrian, it had a j sound in it. It was spelled with a D.
Occasionally you could find references to this phenomenon in publications. I devote a chapter to the new trend in my little book, and you can find descriptions of it here on YouTube. But I wanted to know just how prevalent it's become in different types of words and in different accents around the world, hence my online survey asking about the pronunciations of 84 different words, plus a follow-up survey asking about an additional 28 words, which so far has only had about 1,300 responses. Of course, there were big differences in the number of responders in different regions and age groups. Here, plotted on a logarithmic scale, are the numbers of responders to the main survey. Across regions, there were most responses from people in their 20s, followed by 30-somethings, then under 20s, then those in their 40s and 50s, and the 60 and overs. So there were well over 2,000 responses from Americans in their 20s, but only 7 responses from New Zealanders aged 60 and above. However, consistent patterns certainly show up. Let's look at the word train itself, focusing first on Americans. Of the American respondents aged 60 plus, less than a third felt that the first sound in train is ch, although that's actually higher than I expected. The percentage rises for 50-somethings and goes over 50% for 40-somethings. Then it just keeps rising until nearly 90% of the under 20s say they pronounce train with initial ch. This consistent increase in ch over time is very neat. Surely it couldn't be so neat with other accents. Well, here are the Canadians, and the Australians, and the Southern Brits, and the New Zealanders. Not so smooth, presumably because of the inevitably lower numbers of responses from New Zealand, but starting and ending at about the same percentages as everyone else. I said Southern Brits because this whole shift is due to the following r sound, and I thought it might be best to look at rhotic and non-rhotic speakers separately, and more specifically, I wanted to separate out the Scots. Why? Well, although many Scots have the same kind of r articulation as the other accents, famously there are still Scots who use a tapped or even trilled r, as in train and drum. Those tapped or trilled R sounds are not post-alveolar, and so there's no reason for them to pull back a preceding T or D. And in fact, Scottish T and D can be further forward than elsewhere, at the dental position. So did the Scots turn out differently in the survey? Yes, indeed. It's the same overall pattern, but at a lower rate. None at all of the Scots 50 and older say they have ch in train, but over half of the Scottish under 20s say they do. So I guess this plot is an indirect indicator of the decline of the traditional Scottish tapped and trilled R and the increasing use in Scotland of the internationally more common post-alveolar r. Of course, this is just a single word, but we can see the same pattern for trip, and tremendous, and protrude, and nitrate, and so on. For all of those words written with TR, over 80% of the under 20s say they prefer ch over t, except in Scotland, where the figure is around 60%. Now, paradoxically, we can find in Scotland a different kind of retraction, where R affects not a preceding but a following sound. So in words like force, the RS sequence can create a retroflex sound, forsh. This is reported for Gaelic-influenced speech, but I think I've heard it quite widely from Scots. And then there was Sean Connery, whose sh-type S sounds were, I think, more of an idiosyncrasy, independent of r. Apologies, by the way, to people who did the survey from other parts of the world that I haven't mentioned. I wanted to present here what seemed to be the main effects in a digestible form, but we will be writing up a more complete analysis in the new year. So on this evidence, train has changed for those under 40 and across the English-speaking world, or at least what some call the inner circle Englishes, with Scotland lagging exactly as expected. What I didn't expect was to see North America, Southern Britain, Australia and New Zealand so much in lockstep. It certainly doesn't seem to be the familiar pattern of an American innovation, with everyone else playing catch-up. If anything, though I don't yet know if this is significant, it's New Zealand and Australia that seem slightly ahead of the curve. And as with train changing, so with drum majoring. Here are plots for draw, and dress, and dramatic, and android. Now these effects apply within a morpheme or basic word. If the following r sound is on the other side of a boundary, like in tightrope or handwritten, it doesn't exert the same influence on the preceding sound, and words like these keep some form of t and d, as in tight and hand. So hardly anyone pronounces tightrope with ch, or handwritten with j. Compare nitrate, which patterns with train, and nitrate with a boundary before the R, which patterns with tightrope. Some of you may be reminded here of my video on the lack of aspiration in words like speech and screen, where the S causes the following sounds to be pronounced as in beach and green. That's another effect that's blocked by an intervening morpheme boundary, as in miscalculate and cross purposes, where we have aspirated k and p. And you may remember from that video that such boundaries can fade away over time, so that a complex word, if it's used often enough, can come to be pronounced like a single morpheme. There was once a boundary in discuss, but it's faded away so that discussed sounds like disgust. Well, now consider the super high frequency word bedroom, which of course was historically constructed from two words, but which we use so often that it starts to be pronounced like a single morpheme. So we have a majority of the youngest speakers saying that bedroom contains not d, but j, bedroom, like Adrian. And it seems even the Scots have caught up on this one. On the other hand, the word boardroom is used far less often than bedroom, and its boundary seems intact, preventing the drum majoring effect, so it's not boardroom for most speakers, not yet anyway. I also pointed out in my aspiration video that the fading away of boundaries can happen at different rates in different accents. Many Americans retain a boundary in 16, which allows an aspirated T in teen, 16. But Brits like me tend to treat the word as a unit, so I say 16 with a d like in steam. Compare that with beetroot. This word was in the follow-up survey, which has had fewer responses, and so I've made coarser groupings. We see the by now familiar train-changing effect in southern Britain, Australia and New Zealand, with an increasing preference for beetroot.
Beetroot is excellent to pop in now. Beach.
Not so in North America, where respondents report no train changing, in other words, beetroot.
Canada is a big supplier of beetroot.
So evidently, the morpheme boundary survives there as it does in 16. And so at last to the word we started with, strong, and the change from s to sh, which I call street shopping. In the previous video, I stated my impression that this is common, but a lot less established than train changing and drum majoring. And as expected, the survey plots suggest a trend in the direction of street shopping, but a lot less advanced. In the word strong itself, only the youngest Kiwis break 50%. But what about the sound that follows the s or sh? It's actually been claimed that pronouncing words like strong with sh, widely called S retraction, is evidence of the R affecting the S at a distance, as they say, that is, across an intervening alveolar stop. I've always been very suspicious of this story. I tend to think that those who've believed it have simply failed to notice that the intervening stop has undergone train changing, or rather drum majoring if, like me, you think the stop after the S is lenis rather than fortis. In other words, people are saying not street, but street. And I asked specifically this question in the follow-up survey. How do you pronounce the second sound in words like strong and street? The charts are as I expected. Here we see that around the world, speakers under 30 report that they say the word strong with ch or j rather than t or d. But as we saw before, they're much less likely to say the word with sh. In other words, it seems that the most popular pronunciation among younger speakers is not strong or strong, but strong. Of course, pronunciation geeks like me find all this stuff fascinating, but I have to add that there's a practical advantage in teaching words like train and drum and trip and drip with ch and j. It's a relatively easy way to help learners and L2 users of English to sound more native if that's what they want. Time and again, I've seen students' faces light up when they try the ch or j version of a word, and they immediately hear how much more like a native they sound.
And I just taught this morning actually to a student. Yeah.
How was the student saying it before you taught them?
Trip.
Trip, yeah, exactly. But despite these benefits, as I said, you'll hear practically nothing about this sea change in English pronunciation from textbooks, even ones published very recently, and from dictionaries, except of course the dictionary I myself co-edit, Cube, where the option exists to show the results of your searches with train changing and drum majoring. So let me end by saying an enormous thank you to the thousands of people around the world who've responded to the surveys, and of course by wishing everyone a happy new year. If you'd like to discuss this and other topics with like-minded folks, please feel free to join my Discord. The link's below.